Hello, guys. Welcome aboard.
Hi, hello teacher. How are you?
So far, so good, man. Welcome aboard.
Thank you, thank you.
Hello, teacher Fiona, teacher Will, teacher Richard. Welcome aboard.
Thank you.
Hello, thank you. Hi, everyone.
So everybody has my voice?
Yeah, it's clear and
That's
audible
awesome.
enough.
That's awesome, man.
I think this platform is a little bit different. Actually, I don't have my experience to join here before.
Yeah, that's true. That's true.
That's why actually I don't know where I may to click or how to take the chat box.
Don't worry. Because, of course, I love Zoom, but the point is Zoom is limited, right? Restricted.
Yeah.
And that is really a big problem. Sometimes the conversations, the discussions go further. So I don't want to just stop it abruptly. That's why.
Yeah.
Yeah. And again, gathering people again is challenging and I kind of hate it. Hello, Emma. Welcome aboard. Hello, teacher Ilham. Welcome aboard. Okay. I think you received the question, right? The question which was so popular, right? Everybody is wondering, specifically non-native speakers.
And it's obviously very interesting today.
Yeah. I mean, the question is, somebody raised the question once and said that, do we need to sound like native speakers to be considered fluent? I would say ladies first, but it is up to you. Yes. Ali, I cannot hear you at the moment. Please, yeah, teacher Fiona, go ahead.
Okay, sorry, I'm not sure if the right thing to do is jump in or not, because I haven't done this before. It's all completely new.
Yeah, that's true.
So, yeah, but my answer to your question is no, but I guess you want a bit more than that.
Of course, we're going to dive into that. Okay, why? Why you say no?
There's a few reasons. I mean, even in terms of what we consider fluency, has nothing to do with accent or anything. It's not even actually the same thing as proficiency. So how you sound has nothing to do with your fluency, really. And as long as you can communicate fluently and you don't, you're not having to kind of stop and you're not, there's nothing that kind of impedes your communication, then you can be considered fluent. So yeah, sounding like a native speaker or your accent is kind of something separate from that anyway.
Okay, that is promising. What about you, teacher Will?
Can I wait and hear other people's opinions before I make my opinion known?
I see.
Thanks.
Okay.
I'll go forth, I promise.
Of course. Of course. Teacher Richard?
Oh, wow, I've not been called teacher before, but yes, thank you.
You're
I would
helping
agree
people.
that. Well, thank you. I mean, I would agree and say no. And I'll give you a reason why. I was taught science by a German who communicated things perfectly well with a German accent, spoke fluently, in my opinion, and was able to express herself more than adequately in English, and in fact to a high degree of accuracy, being compared to some monolingual English speakers where I grew up, and had zero problem understanding her. She taught science extremely well. She engaged us. She was funny in English, not just fluent in her ability to communicate what we needed to learn in class, but she was also an entertaining teacher as well. And so absolutely could never say that having an accent that's not of the country where the language is spoken is a necessity for speaking the language fluently in any way that you define fluency.
Okay. All right. Okay, who wants to just talk? Please, go ahead.
I will echo the comments of what Teacher Fiona said and Teacher Richard said. Here's my thought about this. I think personally there is a difference between what I'm going to define as perception versus reality. And I think it's important from my perspective to define having working definitions. Fluency to me is the ability to communicate one's thoughts, ideas, wishes, and dreams, which is significantly different from accent, which is significantly different from proficiency. And so for me to speak like a native, to defining fluency, to me, my sense of my approach to teaching is, I understand why that question is there. And I understand why that question is asked, particularly as it relates to learners. But I think that's kind of an archaic question for me. And to be honest with you, I'm a little sick and tired of hearing it.
Yeah.
English is a global international language. At least that's my perspective. That is my viewpoint. But yet, I'm just going to define reality for myself in terms of what I've experienced in terms of the ESL industry, in terms of what I've heard and thought, both from a student perspective and then also from a teaching perspective. Number one, from a learner's perspective and within the ESL industry, I think it's important, at least from my own sense, to first and foremost recognize that I have a privilege and I am a native English speaker. I recognize that's a privilege. I had no control where I was born. I was born in the United States of America. And yet, to most of the people out there, learners, being a native English speaker is a privilege. That's number one. Number two is that, in my humble opinion, there is a stereotype out there that there's a hierarchical structure as it relates to English, and that the standard of English is such where it is native with a particular accent. And most learners equate, in my humble opinion, most learners equate English with a particular type of accent, with a particular type of region, with a particular type of color. Native speakerism exists in our industry. What's the impact that has in terms of a learner? And then also, let's say, with respect to teachers. Well, I did a video on it on my YouTube channel. If I am learning a language and I don't come from a native English speaking country, and I am raised or weaned from the time, whatever age I'm at, whatever country I'm at, whatever nationality I'm at, to think and believe as though that native is right, associated with a color and accent in particular, and that's the standard. And I've learned that from the time I was 7 years old or 20 years old, whatever my journey is. And then as a learner, I choose to follow people that either have that implicit or explicit bias, and I enroll in universities, language schools that propagate that particular narrative. I certainly understand why people associate with that. So learners have that. What is the impact as it relates to possible teachers in our industry, regardless if we're native or we're non-native? Because for me, the last time I looked, I came from the business world. Teaching is a skill, it's an art, it's a profession. Last time I looked, it's a job, it's a profession. And so therefore, a teacher has an ability, at least in my perspective, to sit back and have necessary qualifications, including education, including work experience, including skills and talents. And yet, what's the impact that it might have? Well, particularly, there are some native, and I hate using this word, if there's a standard out there saying that native is right, what's the impact that it has on native, quote unquote, English speakers? Either consciously or subconsciously, there are some of us that are native teachers in the industry that don't want to recognize their privilege. Or if they do, then what they do is they kind of like, in my humble opinion, they'll sit back and say, oh, they'll use the marketing slogans. Why? Because they know that's what will bring them the clients. Why? Because we condition students in the industry, condition people to do that. What's the impact that it has in terms of non-native individuals? And again, people, teachers, content providers can do whatever they want as it relates to their content, as it relates to their teaching style. But what's interestingly enough is that we sit back and say that English is a global international language. And there are some of my colleagues that do not happen to be their native language is English that have told me personally, DM messages, on live Instagrams or other social media applications, that they have to change the way that they speak or change their particular accent. Why? Because their target population and their students will not even accept them. That's number one. Number two, they will sit back consciously or subconsciously that think that there's something the matter with them and use the very techniques that will sit back and quote unquote oppress. My final statement is this. I am trying to move to this point in my own particular journey within this industry is to sit back and have terms, as teacher Richard and teacher Fiona said, fluency is different from accent, which is a distinctive way in which we speak that is shaped by our culture, our socioeconomic levels, our education, all of that. Proficiency is different. And so one of the things that at least I try to do, not always successfully, is to make a distinction between, okay, is it important to speak like a native and it has a relationship to fluency, or is it important to speak naturally? And that's number one. And number two is to ask questions because, again, I don't know, and people can do whatever they want, but what's the intent out there? So let's look at native speakerism as a economic power system. What is the particular intent when people say sound like a native, speak like a native, be fluent? What's the intent behind that? Because it draws messages or it has certain connotations within the industry. So for me, in conclusion, I understand where the question comes from, but as someone who recognizes that I have a privilege, people like the way that I might sound, but might necessarily like the way that I look. I'm just trying to do my part in terms of making English inclusive and have representation. I'm sorry, one final point. I think one of the things that happens is, or there's an opportunity is that teachers have an opportunity to ask themselves, have they thought about that? What are they doing in their daily lives, which they can do their business? And more importantly, the learners, in my humble opinion, need to engage in critical thinking, need to ask themselves the tough questions and saying, oh, is it important that I sound like I need to be fluent? Or is it important that I sound natural and I be represented? And if indeed that I need to sit back and have a particular accent, then let's sit back and explain the bias, the prejudices, or the assumptions that people should think that I should speak. So those are my thoughts on that.
Awesome. Thank you very much, of course. Thank you, teacher. Well, of course, I mean, these are, as you said, very cliche, and of course, you are not alone. I am sick and tired of this. Normally, people are looking for getting a kind of specific accent all the time, American accent, British accent, and but the question is why? Why, let's say, non-native speakers are looking for such specific accents to obtain?
Acceptance, standard.
Mm-hmm.
I'm sorry, very quickly.
No problem.
Acceptance, standard, all they've been conditioned to. If I am conditioned to think that again, let's remove it. Let's look at native speakerism if people think it exists. Let's look at native speakerism as a power. If I am the king of William Land, right? If I am the king of William Land and there's a particular standard and I've been in that and I'm ruling everything or whatever, and then all of quote unquote, all of the people in William Land have decided to watch that, then if I know any different, if I don't know any different, that's what I'm going to think too. So I've normally said sometimes, which I might have been criticized for within students and also within the industry, and that's fine, people are entitled to their opinion, is that, well, if we know, to your point, teacher, if we know that if we look at it as a power system, it's not surprising, because if that's all the content that I subscribe to, all the content that I watch, and it's a system that is perpetuated within the industry itself, and I don't believe that, oh, you know what, there could be another way that's different. And if I happen to be from Turkey or Iran or Saudi or China and my own person, then people typically follow. So I definitely understand that issue. I definitely understand why it is, because to sound like a native has particular connotations. We might not think it does, but at least in my experience, it has. And I think, asking that question sometimes is difficult for a learner even possibly to think about, because maybe it's too traumatic or maybe they've been bullied. Who knows?
Nice. Uh-huh. Okay. Any other opinions, guys?
Okay, I can talk. I have a question. Is it that important to change your accent in order to sound like native speaker? I find this idea it's really important because people who criticize us, we try to change our accents in order to sound like native speakers because people criticize us. And people who criticize us, unfortunately, they are non-native speakers because native speakers, I think they find it interesting when we speak in our native language, actually. That's my opinion about it. So I just want to ask, is it that important to change our accent and to sound like native speaker? And how long does it take of us? Anyone have an idea about this according to your experiences?
Yes, please go ahead, Teacher Fiona.
Yeah, that's interesting. I think that's a really good point as well, because these attitudes are not just, although they are kind of given across by teachers and the industry in general, it's incredibly difficult to change the attitudes also in students. And I think we have the responsibility to do that as the industry. We have the responsibility to do that as publishers, as teachers, as academies, as, you know, as a whole. But there is kind of, as Teacher Will was kind of suggesting, there is also this associated status, there's competition about speaking. And yeah, I've seen that too. And I've seen that a lot from other English learners, that there's this kind of really vicious, competition and kind of putting each other down for not sounding enough like whatever this is, you know. And I think, I'm not going to answer the other bit of your question.
Mr.
Somebody else
Fiona,
can do
can we
that.
say that they are doing that just to have a clout among their friends? They like to sound, yeah, I think so.
Yeah, I've seen it with my own students and with friends of mine as well. And it's incredibly frustrating because, you know, it's an attitude which has been internalized. And I have actually written down here 5 things that I wanted to respond to Teacher Will with. And one of them is, you know, essentially all of these things that we, you know, a lot of the problems that we have in the industry, the kind of, you know, backpack teachers, native speakerism, accentism, you know, essentially that it can all be wrapped up in racism, essentially. And a lot of that is based in colonialism. And I think a lot of the attitudes that prevail now, which, because it's convenient to those that have power within the industry, they are perpetuated, and we keep repeating these ideas. And what's, you know, the result is that, you know, the students themselves, the English learners themselves, are internalizing these ideas, and it keeps going, and it's a vicious circle. So it's a big responsibility that we have to change these ideas.
Teacher Fiona, just to add on to that, I would expand that, and thank you for your insight on that. I think I would expand that. You know, first of all, I think it's important. I did a video on this a long time on YouTube. I think it's important to recognize the origin of the English language. So I think there's a balance where you have to recognize that, hey, the English language existed from a particular country, that's fine. But I think what happens is I think there's a relationship between race, sex, class, all of it. That's number one. Number two is, you know, oftentimes it's very interesting, in my humble opinion, you know, racism still to this day, or, you know, we've made strides as an industry. Let me say it like this. We've made strides, in my humble opinion, as an industry to talk about, you know, native versus non-native. I think we made strides there. I think we've made strides in terms of you know, gender discrimination or gender bias. Race and ethnicity still to this particular point has still, in my humble opinion, become a very touchy subject. And I think, you know, racism certainly impacts all of us. So, you know, for me, it's kind of like, how do we get to a point in the industry? First of all, it's kind of like, at least for me, it's kind of like I have to say to myself, I'm like, listen, this is the history. There's nothing the matter with looking at history, not blaming people. There are a lot of my white brothers and sisters that are colleagues. There are some that feel white guilt, whatever. There are some other, and everybody has color. There are some, you know, teachers of color that, oh, you know, da 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 da. And I think it's, at least what I try to do is, because I remember having a conversation with a very good colleague of mine who happened to be white, and she was like, I want to have this conversation, but I don't know how to say, because I don't want to offend, and I'm like, I think it's kind of like if we have these conversations, at least what I try to do is have a conversation in terms of honesty without a point of judgment and blame, and then really put the responsibility onto the student. Final point at this moment is that I don't remember if it was me or I was having a conversation with teaching my son, but it's interesting. The ESL, one can make the argument that the ESL industry is one of the last bastions of institutionalized isms, because I just don't think it's about race, because there are people that I know, for example, that happen to be a woman, right, who happens to be a native English speaker, but happens to be Latino or happens to be Asian or happens to be biracial, and there is a different experience. So how do we bring this in terms of a conversation? And then also, a lot of learners, it's difficult for them to internalize that, because if you they have a hard enough time just trying to learn English, and then you're going to learn like, oh, because I said one time, I'm like, you know what, you're a slave in your mind. And the comments or and that's fine. People don't have to follow me, but you might not be physically enslaved, but there is a percentage of learners that I think are mentally enslaved, Teacher Fiona, with the aspect of you're saying of not recognize that they're conditioned. I don't want to call it colonization, but they're conditioned with one narrative.
Well said, teacher. Thank you. Mm-hmm.
Yep.
I wonder what you were saying about one thing that struck me is privilege that you talked about, and it's an interesting concept actually, because if you think of people in English-speaking countries that learn other languages, they hold quite fast to their own accent, and they don't relinquish it very easily. And they're actually quite proud of the fact that they have their accent, because whatever the English-speaking accent is seen as it's a good English-speaking accent to have. And the other children will mock them for trying to speak with a pronunciation or accent that's actually more authentic to the origin of the language they're studying. This is in total juxtaposition to what you see in other countries, where an English accent, whether it's British, whether it's Australian, whether it's South African, whether it's US, one of the US variants, or Canadian, or whatever it is, people will strive to get that accent. And the thing that I've noticed around the world is that, yes, your packaging does make a difference. So there are certain packagings that are easier and more palatable for a local audience to learn a language. So with a language like English, with white skin, you're gonna get on a lot easier. I think being accepted and something that they're gonna listen to. There's absolutely no doubt about that in my mind at all. I also think that Black people have a very easy ride of it compared to people from sort of Middle East or Indian, Pakistani origin, or Southeast Asian origin, or Latina maybe as well, because what happens in those societies, because English is a language that's widely spoken and people recognize, white and black skin particularly, of African European descent, of people dominate that language and they're accepted as native speakers very easily. If you try as somebody of Indian origin to go and teach English in India, they would not look at you probably in the same way as if you were a black or white American or Brit or whatever else. And I absolutely take on that point, because I think you're completely right. It's an interesting phenomenon that as English speakers, we don't necessarily do that as a group, but other people learning our language, we actually, within our own countries and societies as well, we will do our best to correct accent and pronunciation naturally. So we will try and get people, you often see these painful scenarios where people will say, okay, say law, low, and they're saying low, and they're saying law, and they're trying to get them to say it in exactly the same way. And you see this because in our countries as well, we offer accent training and accent reduction training, and people are aware that this goes on. So if you have that as a service that's known outside the country, particularly accent reduction training as a thing, of course, that's going to be something that people go, oh, okay, so having an accent is bad. And this isn't something that just affects people who are second language learners of English. This affects within our own societies and countries who speak English as a first language or at first language level, because it affects people who have a particular type of dialect or vernacular that they use in their own communities. My own original dialect of English, for example, is seen as a low-class variant of English. If I were to speak it to people, and if I were to go for a job interview, I would be perceived very differently to how I'm perceived now, speaking standard Northern English. Similar things happen in the US with African American vernacular English, where it will be perceived differently in different contexts. And there are many, many different elements that come into this that intersect between native speakers, speakers as a second language, people who are native level speakers, people who have a community language, and then they go through an English language education system and therefore have the native level ability. So there are so many layers to that sort of idea that it becomes quite complicated. And I think possibly the people that fit into that category, actually, the last one that I mentioned, of you have a community language or a family language and you learn English because you go through the system and you speak it at school, you speak it outside, you speak it to a native level. When they try and go out abroad, because they speak a local language too, they even find it very difficult. And I imagine sometimes even start doubting themselves. And it's psychologically, there's an issue to overcome that. Yeah, they're just my thoughts on what I've heard.
Nice. Thank you. Well said. Thank you. Thank you very much. Anything to add? Guys, please. Teacher Fiona, please go ahead.
I have loads to say though, so I'm happy to wait for someone else to jump in.
Yeah, I'd love to your point. I just want to, is there like I hate this non-native. Is there anyone else? Because I just don't, it seems as though quote unquote the natives are, and I don't like that.
Discussion.
So feel free.
Of course.
Mustafa, Rama.
Okay, I will ask a question. Today, I saw a post on Facebook saying there are, I think, 8 sounds. If you say them correctly in English, you are going to sound exactly like native speakers. But actually, I didn't believe it because I think there is something called phonetics. We have to be perfect at it. Yeah, and I have a question about phonetics. It is that important to study phonetics to be able to speak correctly? Or no need for that. Actually, I'm studying this subject at university, and the professors at university just teach us how to write a sentence in phonetics way. Transcription, I think we call it. I don't know. I have forgotten actually. So I just want to know, is that important to study phonetics writing? Is that helpful to improve your speaking? Or it has nothing to do with the speaking, it's just for writing?
Who's gonna answer?
I can answer that if you want.
Please go ahead.
So I think in terms of like the phonetic, you mean like IPA, right? Like the symbols to write down the sounds of the language.
Exactly, that's it.
I don't think it's necessary, but I do think it's really interesting. And quite a nice thing to use. I don't.
Because I cannot distinguish between them, especially diphthongs. I found them very difficult for me to distinguish between how well can I use this or that. Okay, so I find them difficult for me.
The thing is, nowadays, I think maybe they were more relevant before you could literally hear the pronunciation. You could just go online and press the little speaker on Google and hear the word that you want to hear. Yeah, I don't know if I don't think they're that relevant for teaching. And I think if I were teaching a student from scratch, maybe a young learner, maybe I would teach the symbols. But I don't think there's any reason to like stress about learning them. No, but they are fun.
And so you think that there is no need to learn them, right? Because I see some people who speak a very good way, but they didn't know them at all. Okay, they don't know them at all, but I am learning them, but maybe I am not sound like others. There are maybe a lot of people who speak better than me, but they didn't learn them. I am learning them, but I feel like there is no need for them. There is no beneficial stuff of learning them.
Mm. Yeah, I mean, you mentioned you're studying at university, right? You're studying this as part of your degree, is that right? Or...
Yeah, exactly.
Yeah, I mean, I guess, yeah, in that case, you need to learn them, but just to pass the test or whatever.
But I just wanted to know, should I learn them just in order by heart, in order just to write in the exam and do well, or they are useful in my speaking? I have to search more and more in order to know how to use them in my speaking. That's my point, actually.
Yeah, I would say no. I'd love to know what other people here think. I think they're fun, they're interesting, they're good if you're starting from zero, maybe, but if you're already, you know, if you already are speaking with a level like you are, I'm not sure they're that necessary.
Okay,
But...
Fiona, can I ask you a simple question? I know that you're a native speaker, right?
I'm from the UK, yeah.
Do you study phonetics at the schools and universities, or no need for that as a native speaker?
No, I'm studying them now because I'm studying a master's in applied linguistics, and so for us, it's like it's what we like this stuff, right? But in school, no, we'd never, like, somebody who's not a language teacher, I don't think would know these.
Okay, I see. Thanks a lot.
And good luck with your...
Can I just chip in with something Fiona said? I think because, I mean, the thing is, we're both from the UK, and there's a big difference between our accents, and this joy of the internet and the ability to actually listen to native speaking and the pronunciation of natives. Now, my accent has mellowed quite considerably from when I was living in the northeast of England. I'd say, Fiona, you're definitely from the southeast of England. Yeah. So, you know, I'm not a teacher. I'm just native and another language learner. And my thing is, like, if I understand somebody who's not native, as long as they're clear and understandable, I don't have a problem with that. I mean, I live in London, and my God, you come across all forms of English in London. And, you know, for me, it's as long as you make yourself understood and are clear, that works for me, because I don't speak your language. You know, it's you have the advantage. You speak English. I speak English, but I don't speak your language, and I don't speak a hell of a lot of other languages. So as long as I understand you, you make yourself clear, I don't really have a major problem.
Dick, I love what you said. I think the aspect of it is, for me, is like when people, you know, people will say, "Oh, I want your accent, teacher." Well, and I'm like, no, you don't. You don't want my accent. Like, be proud of who you are. And I think, Dick, you make a valid point. Whereas, you know, for me, it's about clarity, pronunciation, enunciation, intonation. Those are aspects of me of fluency. Number one. I think, to comment on what the sister was asking earlier, I normally describe, you know, students, you know, when you were asking the question about phonetics, not phonetics, I normally say this. Listen, when you're learning English, you have imagine you're a little kid, and you have all of these different things that you can play with. You find what works for you. If phonetics works for you, great. If it doesn't, that's great. And then you move on to something else. So it's an individual call. And something that Fiona said, I think when I think about accents, one of the things I recognize is, for me at least, is that I think it goes back to the whole level of what Dick was saying earlier, is that most of the time when we're communicating, right, we're communicating with other individuals and with different accents, with different dialects. And for me, I think it's important to recognize is that my mode of communication changes in that, depending on level of comfortability, depending on the familiarity that I have, depending on their level of English. And so for example, I know when I go home and I'm with my family, my communication, whether you call it my accent or my dialect, changes. And I think that's important. So again, I think what's more important is this aspect of fluency, being clear, being able to be understood, and then kind of guiding our learners, guiding our students, and really doing self-reflection and sit back and say, okay, William, do I have accent bias? What is my bias with respect to accent? And then if I have any, and then also with respect to learners, it's kind of like saying, oh, well, I don't like this particular accent, or I don't like the way these people speak. And I'm like, or I can't understand them. Well, maybe you don't understand them because you've only listened to quote unquote natives. Or, you know what? Maybe someone doesn't like your accent. And again, I think it's really just kind of like challenging the learners and ask the question. It would be interesting, like if when people have said, okay, why do you want to study native? I'm like, what does that mean? Because maybe it's not having so much sound like a native, but maybe it's comfortability, maybe it's fitting in, maybe it's cool. Accent is optional. In my opinion, accent's optional. If you're gonna have a native speaking accent, figure out which one you want. Because in the United States, there are 25 different accents. So which one do you want?
Can I talk?
Hello, teacher.
You hear me?
Of course.
Okay. Sorry, I had a microphone problem.
That's okay.
Okay. So I just wanted to say that when we start talking or communicating in a particular language, the thing that we call it as a native speaker, that is just the pronunciation part of the language. We know communicating, there are lots of things that you have to take care when you're communicating, like the structure of the language, vocabulary, the pragmatics, the kinesthetic, the power relation and everything. And you have to think about it at the same time. So with the rise of the world Englishes, I think we have to change this question, like whose pronunciation norm is the English as an international language. So we've got those who are the English speakers of the American, English speakers of the Great Britain, Indians, I don't know, Malaysians, all of them are the native speakers of the English. So we can just put it in this way that as far as the conversation, the speech produced, the utterance is comprehensible, it is accurate, it can be considered, the person can be considered as a native speaker of that language. And I believe that it is better that every speaker takes their language identity with the language that he or she speaks. Can show that I'm not the speaker, I'm not the native speaker of the English, but I'm the speaker of, for example, Turkish, or I'm the native speaker of the Persian, but I'm taking my accent into English because I want to keep my language identity.
That's true.
Yeah.
Good point. Isn't it interesting though? It's kind of like I speak another language other than English, but I think to the sister's point, isn't it interesting? Maybe this has happened with other languages. I'm not sure. But for me, when I was learning French, I had no desire to sound like a native Parisian. No, not at all. I had a desire to be fluent in the language. And so, isn't it interesting that, in my opinion, English still, it's the 21st century, and we're, I think as teacher Fiona mentioned earlier, okay, again, it's a global international language, and yet English seems to, the language still to be like, okay, I need to sound native. You make an interesting point, sister, in terms of the aspect of, the relationship between identity, accent, and English. And I think for a lot of learners, maybe they really haven't thought of that. Some people have chosen, which is their right to do, not to embrace their identity. Therefore, they lose their accent. Other people have decided to retain it. And I think it's an individual decision because, again, I'm in a privileged position. So I don't know what it is to learn English as a foreign language or a third English or a third language, and then understand their particular struggles in terms of what they face, because obviously it's my native language. But learning French, I was just like, listen, I want to be able to speak fluently. I want to be able to be understood. That was my goal.
Yeah, I'd have to agree with that. I don't know whether you know Jose. He's a Chilean guy who has the most beautiful English accent, and he's really worked at it. But he is also phonetics coach, and he has dedicated about 10 years to get his accent perfect, and he just sounds so English. Except he makes the occasional error, and you kind of go, he's not English, he's not native, and it's obvious to another native speaker that he isn't, but his accent is impeccable. I speak Spanish, and it's as rough as hell, but I get by, and I'm quite happy with the fact that people understand that I am not a native, and I think I would rather spend my time building my vocabulary, building my grammatical knowledge up, rather than spending time trying to sound like a native, because I think why should you dedicate that amount of time trying to sound like a native when the reality is building your vocabulary and building your general understanding of the language, I think, is much more important. As long as, again, I come back to something I said earlier, it's this ability to be understandable, be it in English, French, Spanish, Italian, whatever the language might be, as a second, third or fourth language. So, yeah.
I would actually add to that the whole idea of sounding native and passing for a native is something that comes up quite a lot in language learning. And I'm always really confused by it. And there are a couple of reasons why I'm confused by it. Because it seems to be a holy grail that actually you may be able to get so far, like you mentioned, a friend who speaks Spanish and English and studied for a long time to perfect an English accent. For me, it's bizarre because what you do, let's say you're able to imitate an accent pretty well, and you fool somebody, first of all, for 5 minutes, 10 minutes, 30 minutes of a conversation. Then you move to the country, okay? And how far do you go in that deception of trying to fool someone into saying that you're from that part of that country? Well, first of all, I've never met anybody who's been able to imitate my regional dialect and accent in English ever. It's always, and whenever you hear of somebody speaking with a perfect accent, it's always from somewhere that you're not from or they're not from. And no one ever says they imitate my original dialect and accent perfectly, because if you're from there and you grew up in it, you recognize immediately that there's something not quite right. It doesn't take many sentences to go into the conversation for you to get to that point. And there are a couple of reasons for that. I think that mainly it's not to do with phonetics and it's not to do with sound production or reproduction. It's actually to do with psychology. And the fact that you were not born in the country and you didn't grow up in the country and you haven't been through the same cultural experiences. So how on earth do you talk to people, even if you perfect your accent to the sort of the nth degree? What do you do when you start talking about TV shows from the 80s or 90s or 2000s that you never saw, but you were in a conversation with the generation and you cannot even relate to what's going on? They're going to look at you like you're an alien or some sort of spy that's landed in the country. And why are you trying to fool us? And there's a whole lot of strange stuff going on there that, for me, makes the whole idea of wanting to pass for a native or sound like a native 100% of the time null and void and actually a little bit odd. So unless you go and live in some sort of metropolis like New York or something, and you can, but you're bound to say, you make a friend and you're friends with this person for years, you pretending you're from Chicago for I don't know how long, and then all of a sudden says, oh, where in Chicago are you from? Because one of my friends went to school in blah, 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 and oh, and did you grow up there? What are you going to do? Do you build up an entire life? It's just it gets a little bit.
I'm from Chicago, Richard. Lisa, no, just joking.
There we go.
But Richard, very quickly, you brought up two things that I would want to say. Number one is, I respect what you say, and you made me think of the following. Isn't that the privilege that we have in terms of quote unquote being native? That's a privilege that we don't have to think about, right? So for me, it's kind of like, that's why I have sympathy and understanding for someone who is learning English that is not their mother tongue. And because it's like, you know what, I don't have that experience. So therefore, that's a particular privilege that I have. To Dick's particular point is, it's not a judgment. I'm fascinated in terms of the aspect is that if a person can do whatever they wanted to do, right? But when Dick made the comment that colleague of his, he has a perfect English accent, he comes from Chilean. He's Chilean. Did he do that because that was optional for him to do? Or did he do that in terms of assimilating, passing, being accepted by the dominant culture? I'm not saying whatever reason it is. I joked one time with teacher Hassan one day. I'm like, listen, I've been the only chocolate chip and vanilla, so I know what it is to be different, right? So, when people can do what they want to do, but I would be interested in terms of people that are quote unquote English is not their native language. What is that journey? Because that's an experience I don't have. What do I do if I tell somebody, here I am preaching, like, speak naturally, own your identity, be who you are? And this happened to a colleague of mine. He said, William, you're living in a fantasy world because I'm in William land. And, if you want me to speak the way that I speak my native language, I will never get a job. That's number one. Number two is I think that you bring up an interesting point as well when you're talking about, and I think a lot of times we as teachers or particularly learners don't necessarily think about the impact that culture has to a language. Whether you're learning, and I don't think it's, for me personally, if you're going to learn English, are you going to not learn about the culture? Whatever English or country that you decide to learn in, number one. And then number two is that you have some learners, which is their choice, which is optional, which is fine, that they leave their culture at the door. Why? Because they might feel less than. Oh, I don't want to adopt that because of maybe negative stereotypes or discrimination that they run into. So I just wanted to mention that.
Thank you, Teacher Will. Yes, please, Teacher Fiona, go ahead.
Yeah, really, really interesting points. I think that discussion about kind of passing as a native speaker, this sort of imagined situation of somebody coming to the UK and not being able to, or being found out, I suppose. I think that's interesting. And it made me think of, so I've been teaching for almost 10 years now, and I have taught online for 3 or maybe 4 years, but like to students of all over the world. And before that, I was living in Spain and teaching mainly Spanish students. But like, I would say probably less than 10%, as a generous, guess, of my students actually needed English to speak to people in the UK or in the US, or like my business students in Madrid needed to speak English so that they could do business with people in Germany or China, for example. So I think this, like, it's crazy how much we're kind of focused on this, like sounding like, and again, how do we even define native? That's another thing that it's difficult to talk about native speakerism without saying the words native speaker. But
Teacher Fiona, to your point, have you asked your students that, like, or any teacher, what idea, what comes up, or what ideal do we think that learners, when they say native, what does that look like? Does anyone know in their mind? Have we asked that?
Please go ahead.
Can I answer that? Sorry, I'm very conscious about speaking over people, but like, please, if you want to interrupt me, jump in. Yes, I mean, I have asked that, but mainly in recent years, I've kind of been more talking at people. So I think most of my students now realize, that, and this is partly kind of what I think it was it Rama who said before, or I can't remember who it was, that was talking about kind of English as a global language and teachers having some kind of responsibility. And I think a couple of things that I do with my students. First of all, on Instagram and social media, you will not find anywhere the hashtag native speaker. You also won't find the hashtag British English, because I just don't see that those two things are relevant at all to my objective as a teacher, which is to help people to communicate confidently and effectively. That's a responsibility. Teacher Will, sorry, was talking about privilege. We have to kind of constantly be checking that and checking the messages that we're sending to our students as well. And that includes things like hashtags, things like as British people specifically, because I know there's 2 more of you here. When we're looking at things like pronunciation, that we're not offering our pronunciation as the only viable pronunciation when we're looking at things like idioms, teaching idioms. Are these idioms which are only used in our own country, or will they be understood elsewhere? You know, is my use of this word, is it just reflective of where I'm from, or do other people in other places use this differently? And even in terms of the resources that we share with our students as well, are we showing them examples of like other teachers, other speakers, sorry, you know, are we including the whole of Anglophone Africa in some of the resources and examples that we're teaching our students? And like somebody said before, you know, Malaysia, God knows, Kenya, for example, Barbados are both native English speaking countries. Are we including these countries in, you know, accents and dialects in our teaching? I think I've gone a bit off point. I've gone a bit off topic. What was the question? I've forgotten.
But teacher, very quickly, teacher Fiona. But if the interesting thing is that I was asking you. I love your topic. When you asked your students, did they give you an answer? Like when they think native, what did they say, or what feelings or emotions did it bring up?
Yes, and I'm sure you've had this as well, because I find it quite frustrating, is when I ask, you know, why they want to sound like a British person or why they want to sound like a native speaker. It's because they just love that accent. Oh, the British accent is so great. We just want to sound like it. It's the best accent. There's not really any reason for it, but there's this idea that it just, and you can't really argue with that when somebody says, oh, because I just love it. You can't really, it's difficult to sort of unpick that, you know.
And the English accent is all over the place because the UK is a small country. You're talking, Teacher Will, you were talking about 25 accents. There are probably 25 accents in the northeast of England alone. You know, so like I said, I'm probably, I don't know whether I'm the odd one out here as a native speaker. I'm not a teacher. And I've come on to these forums, these WhatsApp forums, as a result of being in a Spanish forum. And it's just like, oh, we need English speakers. And I suppose if I go, and I don't know how many of you actually speak a second language, who have learned a second language from scratch in later life. But I suppose one of the things I did was I'm mimicking my teacher, or I was mimicking my teacher when I first went to Spain. And you copy. And I suppose when people listen to us as natives, they're just trying to copy the pronunciation. And if I leave messages, I don't know. I always say with idioms and with pronunciation, I don't know whether this is purely a British thing or whether this is universal across the English-speaking world or can be used in the States. I always try and put that in because I know, having been to the States occasionally, I've said things and people just kind of go, what? Or Americans say things and you kind of go, okay, I think I get that, because, you know, we English is our native language, but it varies and it differs. It differs, you know, from one side of the pond to the other side of the pond, or from Australia, New Zealand, or all these native-speaking countries. I suppose when the people I'm dealing with, they either want to sound like an American or like a Brit. It's fine, you know. We have that advantage. It's and I can only do, in terms of the way I speak. I just. Sorry, I'm rambling slightly, but I just give my pronunciation. I just give my viewpoint on things, and like I say, where I'm not sure whether it's applicable in the US or other places, I just say, I know this is British, but I've got no idea whether it's applicable anywhere else. Can I ask a quick question? Who else here has picked? I know one of you already has. Fiona, I'm assuming you speak Spanish as well, so you picked up Spanish. Who else has learned another language later on in life? Well, yeah, obviously
everybody.
I was actually more thinking of the native English speakers. I should have clarified that one. My apologies. So we've all been through this process. Of learning another language. Did you have desires to? And one of you has already answered this. To sound like a Spaniard, to sound like a French person, to sound like an Italian, or did you just have the desire, like me, just to kind of get to the point where I was, like I said before, understandable, where I could communicate, where I could travel the world, and on occasions have communicated in Spanish in Romania, Japan, and we've been to Japan and a couple of other places. Oh, Germany, weirdly enough, and not in English, which was the surprising thing. You just find yourself being in odd places and speaking a language which you wouldn't have thought would have been a major language there. So I don't know. I am rambling. My apologies. I'm rambling.
That's okay.
I'm gonna shut up.
Thank you, guys. Actually, Amin has a question. Please go ahead.
Yes, can you hear me?
Yes, of course.
And I just joined the conversation and accept my apologies.
That's okay.
Hopefully everyone is okay. And my question is about how to speak fluently English because I want to speak like native speakers and I pay a lot of attention to that and it can slow me down sometimes. What do you do?
We found you.
What do
We
you
were looking for you.
Brother Amin, I love it.
what
Brother,
do
can
you
I
think
ask
I
you,
should do?
brother, can I ask you a question? You can say you could say on your bit. So you want to speak like a native? Wonderful. May I ask why?
God. Thank you.
May I ask why? Why do you want to speak like a native?
And I realized that sometimes I want to speak like native speakers, and I really I feel like it's so important for me, and
Okay.
I pay a lot of attention to that. And
Okay. Why, brother? Why? I just want to. That's great. You can do whatever you want. I just want to know, Amin, why do you want to speak like a native?
Yes, I know it's my problem, and I have to fix it.
It's not a no, brother. Brother, time out. Slow your roll. I did not say it's a problem. I was just curious. Why do you want to speak like a native?
Yeah.
I'm not saying it's a problem. Why? I'm just asking why.
Okay, teacher. I got it.
Okay. No. Okay, brother. Where are you from? What's your native language?
Turkey, Istanbul.
Okay, great. You're Turkish. So listen, I want to learn Turkish. Do I need to sound like you, like a native Turkish, a native Turk?
No.
Okay, why?
Because our mother language is Turkish.
Okay, but I want to sound like you, right? I want to sound like a native Turk, but you're telling me I don't have to sound like you. Why?
Let's try it. Tell me good night in Turkish.
Listen, brother. I only speak French, and I'm trying to learn broken Arabic. I just want you to think of what you just said. If I want to learn your language, brother, listen. If I want to learn Turkish, right? I've been to Istanbul. I've been to Turkey a couple times. If I want to learn Turkish, it's a language. Do I need to speak like you, like a native Turk? Yes or no?
Okay, I truly got it. Thank you.
I don't know what you got, but I'm glad you got it. I'm glad you got whatever you got, brother. My point is this, brother. Listen, if you want to sound like a native, this is just my thought. If you want to sound like a native, I usually say, do you? Like, do you? If you want to sound like a native, do you? There's nothing the matter with that. But my humble opinion is, if I don't need to sound like a native when it comes to your language, Turkish, then why do you need to sound like a native when it comes to English if it's a global international language? And you know what, brother? I respect that you say that because you can do whatever you want to do, right?
Yeah.
But I respect that you said that because I think what you have said is what a lot of people and a lot of students want to do. So I'm not knocking you. I'm not criticizing you. I'm not. I'm just asking you to think of why you want to do that, right? Something in your mind, like if you say to me, it's cool, you'll sound like Teacher Fiona, or you'll sound like Teacher Richard, or it's cool, you want to do that, or you want to be alone, or you want to fit in with the group, or whatever. I just want you to know why. And once you know the why, it will help you on your English journey. I'm sorry, Teacher Fiona, I interrupted you. Sorry.
Can I say something about this?
Go ahead.
Okay, I know that as learners, we like to sound like native speakers because when we talk to anyone, they hear us, and if our accent is beautiful and like native speakers, they say to us, wow, where are you from? And start asking questions like this, then others think, oh my God, so it's something really, really important. We have to do it. So that's why we are as learners, I think as that person, I don't know what, oh my gosh, what is his name? But actually we think in this way because we think it's something very important as we see among learners of English. That's it.
All right, teacher Fiona, I want to.
Yeah, it was just a quick thought. I wonder if which is a problem in itself, but I wonder if you know, native and fluent are getting a bit mixed up here, that when people say, you know, like I want to sound like a native, it just simply means I want to sound fluent, but for some reason that message has conveniently for some got a bit mixed up somewhere.
Okay. Teacher
Or is it by
Richard?
design?
Yeah. Teacher Richard, you wanted to say something? I think you raised your hand. Yeah.
Yeah, thank you. I actually have been based in the region of the world which is very close to Turkey. So I've got first-hand experience of this, and I speak a Balkan language as a home language, and have done for 17 years. So what I can impart in terms of to answer the question as to why people want to sound native or sound as close to a native sounding accent as possible, in my experience here in the Balkans, it's because there's a social status attached to it. So speaking, it doesn't need to be exactly as a native, but speaking in a way that sounds to the other people around them as almost like a native, it gets them kind of gold star points. And it's, as I was saying before about the English, where when we're at school, we keep hold of our accent like a badge of honor, and we don't really, you know, you even have your local accent. A lot of people in a number of other countries will learn English with with as native accent as possible for the exact opposite reason, because that's the badge of honor that they want to have and to claim. And I know that, for example, if someone speaks a language, whether it's English or German, a lot of people learn German here, where I am at the moment. And if they have a really strong regional accent that other native speakers of these languages can hear and identify as not just that they're from the country, but from the region, they laugh at them and they mock them because it's, oh, listen, you sound like you're from that village. Why do you sound like you're from that village using words and grammar from the other language? Whereas if you sound as close to what people perceive as what you hear on TV, then that's good and you've achieved something. And there's a lot to do with that. And maybe the passing for native has been conflated with this idea of fluency along the way. And I think that's kind of part of the problem.
Good points, teacher Richard. I don't personally, you know, again, I think it goes to an earlier point. That's why I normally, for me, it's important to ask the question why, because ultimately a learner can do, he or she can do whatever they want to. That's ultimately they're all adults. But I think it's important. Go ahead, teacher Roy, you had a comment, brother?
Yeah, thank you. Thank you, teacher. Actually, I want to share my... Actually, I had a lot of questions actually to ask you teachers, and you all the teachers are now active, and we have a chance with the non-native speakers. You are getting a chance to talk to you here. So actually, I had a lot of questions, but I think I'm done with
the most important ones.
All the answers. Yeah, with all of the answers, and now I feel like that you are more advanced than the topic of the day today. So now I just wanna clarify one thing. Actually, just being a non-native speaker of this language, English language, and this is actually why do we have this kind of instincts to sound like the natives? Why we non-native speakers we have this kind of instincts to sound like you guys and the people in your country? So it's actually when I started speaking and learning this language. So from the first time I started following you guys on YouTube's and different kind of medias, I started listening you and watching your videos and try to watch some of the native YouTubers that I always try to listen and try to capture some of the things, try to grab some of the skills that that can make my speech so attractive. So that I always think about this, because in my country, the people who are literally so much interested to speak English, to develop their skills in this English language. So they always just hanker after this kind of accent and this kind of intonation, articulation, and some of the other things that actually make your species so attractive. So these guys is here in my country, they're hankering after these things just because they love these things. And we, the people, we are just accustomed to watch and to follow from the basic level we start actually learning your language. So from the basic level we start following you, we start listening you. And this is how actually making us so interested to sound like you guys and to get accent and to get an intonation like you guys. So this is the actually instincts that always work in our mind in the non-native speakers to sound like you. So it's ridiculous. I confess that here, but always we do because we love this. And gradually in this 21st year, everything we are going everywhere we are going, and we are using devices, modern devices, and we are studying higher. We are gonna do our higher studies. So wherever we are going, we are getting improvement of English language, and everybody is trying to speak like so attractive, and I mean like you guys, and they're just trying to get the accent and intonation like you. So this is the actually instinct working in everybody in the non-native speakers. That's why it's I think it's gonna be like a natural instinct in ourselves that we want to sound like you, and we as we are learning and as we are following you guys, and as we are just being with full norms and forms, actually just to capture the things, capture the grab the things that you usually leading your life with there. So this is how actually we are thinking, and it's gonna be like natural instinct that making us to follow you, making us to learn your language, like you were speaking there. So these are the things always work in my mind. And now I just wanna ask you one question: that if I literally want to sound like you the native speakers, so what should be actually the most important thing? What should I focus on? It's a study of phonetics or linguistics, or I should do practice more?
Can I say something?
Please.
Because I've been listening to Fiona, who has the loveliest English accent. So, you know, do I want to sound like Fiona, or do I want to retain my original accent, which actually I've lost to some extent? I'm a Geordie, so my accent has very much mellowed having lived in London. But, you know, would I want to follow Fiona and speak like Fiona, obviously as a man, but not as a woman? But, you know, that sort of very lovely English, Southern English accent, or possibly Richard, who was, again, a very clean English accent. I think, you know, that would be my thing, is accents, pronunciation. Just there are so many of them in the English speaking world. You know, if Roy, if you want to sound like a native, literally listen to one native and just follow that native. Don't listen to anybody else and just mimic them. But that's not going to work. And I come back to something I said earlier. The biggest thing for me is that you just improve your grammar, your vocabulary, and your fluency. Leave the idea of trying to sound like a native behind. Improve your English to the point where you can fluently speak on any topic, and forget this idea of sounding like myself or Fiona or Teacher Richard or the other Richard or any other native speaker here.
Thanks, teacher. Thanks for giving me a nice suggestion here.
Well, can you remove the word teacher from me, because I'm just.
Dick, we're all teachers. We're all teachers and learners. Hey, Roy, I'm going to call you Teacher Roy. Thank you very much for sharing your thoughts, and I really appreciate you sharing that. The only thing that I would encourage you to do is two things. Number one, you have an opportunity to sound yourself. You have this language is yours just as much as it is mine, and you have an opportunity to own who you are. And, you know, I would say, as to Dick's point, as long as you're clear, as long as you're confident, as long as you are able to communicate your thoughts and ideas, that to me is the most important thing. To Dick's point, if you want to sound like a native, then I would recommend that you figure out what particular accent do you want, and you have to shadow that person for a while. The thing that I would ask you to think about is, why is that? Here's something, one last thing I want you to think about. You said, which I respect, you said throughout your speaking, and I need to say, I understood everything that you said, okay? But you said that it's instinct, and you were sharing your experience. You were like, oh, it's instinct, we have that instinct. One of the things that I want you to think about, and you don't have to answer me now, is that instinct or is that conditioning? So what do I mean by that? Is it instinct that you want to sound like Fiona or sound like Richard or you sound like Dick? Or is it that from a very young age or whenever you started in your English journey, that you were watching content or getting book materials or getting speakers, and you have a right to do that, saying that. So is that something that's instinctual or something that you were programmed or conditioned to think about? And maybe that's a deep question for you, and I'm not trying to be deep. That's just something that I want you to think about. But at the end of the day, I would say to you is do what you want to do, but before you worry about an accent, I recommend, I don't know if you follow me, you don't have to. I did a video on YouTube, on my YouTube channel, and I said, think of English as if you like cake, think of English as a cake. And so if you're making a cake, you have like flour and water and baking powder, all those other things. If you relate that to the cake, then think of English as the basics. Your foundation of a cake is clarity, pronunciation, articulation, right? Focus on your foundation first. And once you're cool with that, then have an accent, which is the icing on the cake. And you can have your own accent. You can have Teacher Fiona's accent, Richard's accent, whatever it is. But make sure my only suggestion to you is make sure you focus on that foundation. And again, I'm speaking from an experience because I don't know what your journey is. I know a lot of times students that are learning language, they're bullied, they're ridiculed, they're made fun of. And I respect that, you know what I mean? But I'll let you into a little story, bro. I might have been from not Chicago. I grew up in New Jersey, right? I grew up in America. I'm a native English speaker. And you know what? I was ridiculed, I was bullied. Some people said I didn't sound this enough. Some people said I didn't sound black enough, or I sounded white enough, or I didn't have the right accent. And so I can only relate to my story. But at the end of the day, I was like, you know what? It took me a very, very long time to get over that and stop worrying about what people thought about me and worry about what I needed to do. And as long as I'm able to communicate English, it's fine. So again, thank you for your story. Thank you for sharing that. Do you, and figure out what works best for you, because you have a right to the language just as much as anyone on this call.
I see. Thank you. Teacher Fiona?
Thank you. It's fantastic.
Indeed.
Yeah, sorry, I just have one very quick comment actually, and then I have to go, but it's in response to your question, Roy, because I think I can summarize what you said as basically like, I know it's wrong, but I want it kind of thing. Like I know that I shouldn't, and I know that all of these teachers are telling me that I shouldn't be aspiring to this, but I just want it. So how can I get it? And I think one really important thing to kind of think is like this isn't really just about you. This is actually quite a lot bigger than that, because this does a whole lot of damage, not just to you actually, and to other learners, but in the industry itself. Like there are many really qualified, capable, non-native speaking, English speaking teachers who are discriminated against, because of this issue. And I tell you, can anyone else hear that echo?
Yes,
Mhm.
yes.
Okay. Sorry, I'll just carry on. And I'll just tell you a very, very quick story about sort of privilege, and also the idea that I firmly believe that the best teachers are those teachers who know their students culturally as well. I was working a few years ago for an organization called Language Beyond Borders. We were kind of helping people to get access to the global marketplace, basically. We were kind of helping to train people in Gaza to become what was it? Some kind of computer. My area is not this. Some kind of IT computer related thing. But we were teaching them the English so that they could kind of take the skills that they were learning and go and work online and sort of get around all of the issues of access that they had in Palestine. Now, when I was designing the program, I very naively put the male students and female students in the same class. So I kind of designed this whole amazing, brilliant program where I was mixing the genders. And after a few months of barely any female students appearing in the classes, I was kind of, all of us actually in the organization, and we're all kind of, Western, mainly white English teachers. We're all asking, why is it that we're not getting women coming to these classes? Why is that? And it actually took me speaking to, one of the students there in Palestine to just tell me the very obvious thing, that they don't want to come to a class where there are male students, and also that I had put the class at a ridiculous time when most women in that area are busy with other things as well. I had no cultural awareness of their situation. And yet I was in this position where I was designing the program for them. Native speakerism causes these kinds of situations where teachers who actually are culturally fluent and completely capable don't get the opportunities to try and to actually kind of improve the situation in their own communities, because there's us lot, being given opportunities and, privilege, basically. So this whole idea of kind of pedestaling native speakers, I know it's very easy to say, oh, I know it's wrong, but I want it. But really, this is bigger than just you and just that.
Well said, Teacher Fiona. Well said.
Thank you.
Teacher Fiona, very quick, I know you have to go. Can you, real quick, if you're on Instagram, please send me a DM message. I'd love to continue the conversation. So
yeah, sure, I will do.
Thanks.
I will do. Okay, I will say goodbye to everybody now. It's
you.
really, really lovely.
Thank you, Teacher Fiona,
Bye. Thank you
for being with
Bye-bye.
us. Take care.
I think, I think it's interesting what teacher, I got in trouble one time speaking to my learners, but I just shared my perspective. But I think that one of the things that at least Teacher Fiona made is this it's kind of what Teacher Richard said, is it's kind of like the self-oppression that people put on themselves. I call it sin, not, biblical or religious or spiritual, but I call it like self-inflicted nonsense. So Roy, again, do you, and I just like the point that Fiona said, because it's not only, privilege, but imagine the talented individuals, like the reality is numerically, there are more people that are quote unquote, non-English native people than native individuals. And so, imagine the impact that does if somebody's coming up, a Roy or someone else, that it's like, they want to be a teacher, they want to give back to their community. I think one of the things that needs to be discussed, or we as teachers or educators have a responsibility to think about, is really challenging the community itself. Because it's one thing if, let's say, a teacher recognizes it regardless of their national origin, but yet if the community or the target population that you're thinking has that particular bias, that's a whole nother issue.
Thank you, Teacher Well. Anything to add, guys? Any other questions? Please.
Okay.
Please go ahead.
Hi, good evening, everyone. I think probably evening except USA.
Most probably.
Maybe it's day there. Okay, good day for Will, Mr. Will. I cannot hear you.
Brother, I'm American, but I'm actually in Saudi Arabia, so it's the same time as Turkey. So I'm from America, but I'm actually living in Saudi, teaching and working. So it's the same time in Turkey. Where are you from, brother? Where do you live?
I'm Syrian. I lived 18 years in Saudi Arabia.
Okay, got it. Yeah, so I'm in GMT +3. But to your point, in America, in Chicago, it would be 3 o'clock in the afternoon.
I don't know. I'm really very far from the teaching or learning industry. I never had any native teacher for English in my life. So I think there is some missing point. Maybe how about those non-native English speakers? How about this accent? Maybe we have like a new accent in making. I think, especially nowadays with the internet and technology and all this new technology that has made the whole world like a small village. Nobody is limited to the small market. Sorry, okay, Richard?
No, I was waiting for you to finish, and then I was going to answer some of the questions you asked. So please do finish first.
Okay. So I think, especially nowadays with this new technology and the world has become like a small village. Everyone, even singers, for example, you take example, like if the song is very simple and very so easy for the whole world, it becomes like trending, more trending. You don't see very hard very locally accent songs go trending globally. For me, I'm very thankful for all those who I came across, especially YouTubers, maybe Indians, maybe Europeans, and all helped me in improving my English. And they are most of them not natives. Especially in my work, we communicate with Indians, Malaysians, Singaporeans, Europeans, and Filipinos. So I don't know. How about this accent, a new accent, or new simple English that just covers our need for the business, for the entertainments, or whatever? How about this? I mean, as most of you agree, we don't need to go for a special accent to be perfect in English. I know I'm not that perfect. I'm not. My English just good enough for me and for to make good conversation and to make the point is clear. To make the point clear. So how about this accent? If you go to the YouTube, a lot of non-native English speakers running very big channels, especially in food, traveling, and or computers, technical stuff, or maybe chess. I love chess. I watch always this guy from Croatian guy. He has like 1.5 million followers. He is not native. So how about this language? Are we in the wait for a new accent, a new simple English, just for the business, maybe for the new era that we are
communication
living? Yes.
Abed, I just want to ask you something. Because you are from Syria, did you study English literature or how did you learn English?
You know, our education system, I'm from the old generation, and that time, you know, our education system is fucked up. So I did not learn any English in my school. I even did not attend any courses. Maybe 1 month only in Malaysia, and my teacher was Filipino, not native either. And but I watch movies, I watch YouTubes, I traveled a lot, I met with a lot of people, but I learned on my own. That's all.
Okay, Abed, do you communicate with immigrants here in Syria in English, or you have never tried this? Because I did several times. That was amazing for me to have a chance to speak with immigrants in English.
Okay.
I know what do you mean, because our education system in Syria is especially in English, is very weak, and for some reasons, it is not a hot spot for travelers or to come, and you don't have that chance to mix. It's not like, for example, in Saudi Arabia, I can give you an example. There are a lot of nationalities there, and even now you can see a lot of travelers. So the chances,
The same in Syria.
chances
The same
is
here. We
more.
have a lot of immigrants. I see every day Russian people, Russian from Afghanistan, Pakistan. I communicate with them in English. Where do you live exactly in Syria? Do you live in Latakia, Damascus? Where do you live?
No, I'm an immigrant since 2001.
Really?
So I'm not. Yeah, I'm not living in Syria.
That's why you didn't get me, because here in Syria we have people from all the world. So I forgot.
Maybe now, yes, yeah, maybe now, yeah.
Okay.
Unfortunate. Okay.
Yes, Teacher Richard, I think. Sorry, Teacher Will. I think Teacher Richard.
Teacher Richard, yeah, Teacher Richard had a comment.
Yeah.
Okay. So thank you very much for coming back to me. In terms of new accents, yes, new accents are developing all the time in English that become a standard way of speaking English. There are many standard ways of speaking English. So my heritage, for example, from my family, we spoke a language called Welsh, which is a Celtic language. It's very different to English. It's not just a dialect or an accent of English. It's a different language family. And when it comes to sort of oppression and things, our family was forced to abandon the language, and so the language was taken away. Now, when the English forced themselves onto Wales and Ireland and Scotland, and the languages were lost slowly, they've not been lost completely, fortunately, but when they were lost to a large degree. When people spoke English, they spoke with an accent, okay? So they would speak with a Welsh accent, with a Scottish accent, with an Irish accent. And at some point, those accents would have been foreign, non-native English accents in English. Nowadays, we don't recognize them as foreign accents in English. They are recognized as native accents in English. A similar thing would have happened in Singapore. Now we have Singlish in Singapore, which people recognize as a native way of speaking English. In India, there are families that use English as their language, and they have a lovely, actually very, unfortunately, I have to control myself at work. I'm not allowed to interview an Indian, because if I do, I will always give them the job. I'm so positively biased towards an Indian accent because it's my favorite accent in English. That also has become a standard accent in English, and if somebody speaks with an Indian accent, you as another speaker of English, as another native speaker of English, I can never make an assumption that that person doesn't speak English natively. I don't know until they tell me, or if they're at a native level, unless it's very, very obvious because they have limited range of the language, but you cannot always tell. You would need to ask probably irrelevant and uncomfortable questions if you really wanted to dig, but the fact that these accents and languages change and shift constantly. There have been accents that have developed because of merging of other linguistic groups and cultures. So the way South Africans speak English, for example, it's got a very specific sound to it that would be influenced by the Afrikaans and by other languages as well. I mean, even American English developed from the language that went over to the Americas. And if you go to different parts of the United States, you hear the influences of the different peoples that moved there. So if you go to Minnesota, you hear a Scandinavian twang to the English. And you can't help but get it. If you listen to people from Puerto Rico or from somewhere like that from the US or from US territories, they will have a native level English ability or native English, and they will have a Spanish Latin sounding accent. If you go to Gibraltar, which is part, still under the United Kingdom, people will speak Llanito, Spanish and English, and they will have an accent that is particular to that part of Gibraltar, that part of the world. And some people will say, oh, it sounds Spanish, but that may be their Spanish accent is actually a native Gibraltar accent in English. So yes, your accent or an accent similar to yours could very easily be or become native. There's absolutely no reason why that can't happen.
Thank you, Teacher Richard. Yeah, please.
Very quickly, Brother Abed, a couple points. When you talk about accent, my thought would be the following. Accents have always existed in the English language, just like any other language. Just like if your native language is Arabic, there are different accents within Arabic, within French, within Spanish. Perhaps what's happening now is due to globalization, due to the aspect that is English is becoming more studied, that the other different accents of people speaking it are given attention. That's why representation is very important, because again, we talk about that English is a global international language, yet there is one or two particular accents that are considered the standard or better by learners. That's the first point. And the second point that I would say is, Abed, you made an interesting point. You were talking earlier about it. It is true that you have, if you're relating on social media, that you have different people from different parts of the world that have large followings of, followers on YouTube, for example, in different industries, whether it's like food or whether it's gaming or things. That is true. What's interesting is perhaps when it comes to the English arena, there is a lack of diversity, in my humble opinion, as it relates to, showing a true diversity. Meaning this, if you take a look, if you go on, Google for a minute, and you type in subscribers with more than 1 million followers, or you type in, for example, best YouTubers of English, there are certain similarities that those people have. For example, out of 17 individuals that have 1 million followers or more, what similarities do they have? Most are from native English-speaking countries. Most are white Europeans, either from the United States of America or Britain, right? That does not exclude any of the sacrifices or work that they have done, because certainly longevity, those people have done great work. They have good content. They've been on the medium longer. But it is still, if you're looking in terms of representation, as far as there is one individual who is a non-native, quote unquote, non-native individual. She's from Brazil. She has over 1 million followers. Most of her content is in Portuguese, British. There's another individual who is a non-native, but she has, which is her right maid, she quote unquote phenotypically looks white, right? So there is still, I would say that within the English language community, that's an opportunity for anyone, there's still a particular narrative. That's why representation becomes important. So yes, it's true what you're saying, that yes, you have different people speak English, whether it's gaming or whether it's, film or whether it's comedy, but it's still in the English language industry, that representation is not necessarily as prevalent as in other industries. That's the only thing I wanted to add.
Thank you, Teacher Will. Thank you very much. Maybe we need to just wrap it up. And as a final question, Teacher, what is your recommendation to, let's say, students and language learners, as well as, of course, the non-native language users, let's say? I mean, about their obsession towards, pronunciation or accent. What should, students do? I mean, what is your recommendation, or what are your recommendations? I mean, what should students focus on rather than just focusing on accent or, I don't know, pronunciation or what? Yes, please.
Okay, so I think we've talked a lot about accent and native-like pronunciation or accent as well today, and I agree that for me it's really a non-starter. I don't think it's that worthy of this holy grail that it's given. I would say that pronunciation is important for clarity of speech and for understanding. So when I was studying at university, I studied Swedish for a year, and we spent an entire year just studying pronunciation. And the kind of things we did was we listened to words on their own and also in sentences, and we would have to record ourselves pronouncing them after the speaker. Then we would listen to the original or recording back to back, and we'd listen to see if we could hear a difference in it. We would also get feedback from our teacher as well, who was a Swede from Gothenburg, and we would get that feedback, and then she would comment on what we said not quite right, or what we didn't pronounce clearly enough. And what we'd then do is we would ask questions like, where is the sound being created? So if you're having trouble, for example, with the th or the in English, questions like, where is your tongue in your mouth? Where do you feel the air coming out of your mouth? Do you feel a vibration in your throat when you're saying the sound? Do you feel a puff of air if it's a p or a b? What sort of sound is it? How does it feel? And if you can start getting an idea for where it is, even if you can't hear it in the beginning, you can start getting feedback, and then these tips will help you to then take the feedback and try and emulate as closely as possible to how it's being said. Then you can try the recording again, see how close you get to it in terms of the pronunciation. I think one thing that was said earlier on is very true. When it comes to English, native English speakers, whether from the US, whether they're from the UK, are very privileged in that they get to travel the world, and their language is the most spoken language as a second language. It's the most studied second language for pretty much the whole world, right? So we're very fortunate, and we're used to bending our ears a little bit as well, to understanding quite a wide breadth of pronunciation differences with English. So from the way I say thee, thou, through, though, and the way someone in Ireland might pronounce a th sound would differ. So they'd say tree, true, and they wouldn't pronounce it in the same way. We are used to that difference. There's a range that we can adapt our ears to. We can bend our ears. But if you really want to work on pronunciation, just so it's clear, that's what I would do. So depending on your language that you're coming from, there will be different things that you would work on and different things that you would find challenging. A Spanish speaker tends to have difficulties with B's and V's, for example, and so they have to work at saying a V, B, and not overusing it in one area or another. People from Chinese speakers and Japanese speakers tend to have the R and L issue, where they will confuse the R and the L sounds in English, and they can often produce them, but they can't hear when each one's used. So in each individual language, a learner really should start sort of analyzing the way they speak by doing this recording comparison and asking for feedback from somebody who speaks the language as they want to speak it, and whichever that may be.
Thank you very much. Teacher?
Briefly, I would just say English is a journey and not a sprint. But if you're learning a language, enjoy it, have fun, be yourself, recognize it's okay to make mistakes, focus on fluency, clarity, pronunciation, being clear, ask questions, ask why. I think asking why, encouraging, to think critically, and ask a learner, ask themselves the question, does this work for me? Because English is such a personal journey. It's not every place of judgment. So having fun, being fluent, and then figuring out with respect to accent, as I said earlier, it's the icing on the cake, because ultimately English is an individual journey, and to surround yourself around have an educational support system that's going to be supportive of your goals. But at the end of the day, a learner should do what works best for him or her. So enjoy it.
Thank you very much. Very good. Teacher Elham, do you want to say something? You're so silent today. I think the same issues with the microphone. Emma?
Hello, hello.
Hello.
Yeah, hi. I'm not going to say anything about today's meeting because I'm just here to learn. So the more meetings I'll come to, the more I'll participate. Okay?
Okay,
I've
sure.
sent you all a message, so yeah, thank you.
Thank you very much for joining.
I'm sorry, the last point that I want to mention about this accent and pronunciation is the fact that as if you're just learning English for doing a kind of business or having communication with the other part of the world, I think it's not just very important to pick up a special accent, but those who want to be a teacher, I think sticking and picking up a special accent would help them to seem more sophisticated in the area. And that's why maybe those who are learning language as a major just like it, and they have this passion to just pick up British accent or American accent and the like.
Nice, interesting. Yeah. Very good. So, what else, guys? Dear teachers, dear participants, do you want to say something? Or just we need to end it?
I just want to say thank you very much for the opportunity to speak. The thoughts that I have my own, and I appreciate hearing the comments of my fellow colleagues and brothers and sisters, teachers, students. So thank you for the invitation.
Thanks for being here, Teacher Will.
Yes. Thank you.
Thank you
also for everyone. Yeah, it has been a really interesting meeting.
Exactly.
Thank you.
And as well, Teacher Richard, thank you for your really brilliant comments and really lovely and knowledgeable information. Thank you very much.
Yeah.
Thank you for having me. It's nice to meet you all.
Likewise.
Thank you all. See you again. Hopefully soon.
Hopefully see you again. Hopefully. Take care of yourselves.
Okay.
Have a good
Bye-bye.
day,
Thank you.
evening, night. Take care.
Good night.
Good night.
Good night.
Good night, man.
Okay, let me get out of here. Thank you, teacher.
Thank you, Teacher Will.
I was like, you know what? I was like, I will send me a message on Instagram and give a chat. No, but thank you. I was like, oh my God. So it was fun. Thank you.
Exactly. Thank you very much. Likewise. I really appreciate that, teacher. Thank you very much.
No problem. No problem. Bye-bye.
See you, man. Bye. Take care, teacher. Bye-bye.